I'm going to ask you about Newsy Lalonde. Okay. I'm going to ask you about Newsy Lalonde and that era. Because when I came to the States, I told my buddies, no, dude, you should see hockey, like junior B hockey in the West Island. It was like a Vietnam War zone, right? We had the two St. John's ambulances parked outside, and always a couple of mandatory cops sitting there. But talk to me about New Zealand alone. Tell about the character a little bit, and then tell me about how that story relayed when you did it the other day.
Yeah. Well, Edward Newsy Lalonde was born in Cornwall, Ontario, 1887. We just celebrated, we just passed this, what would have been his birth date, still was his birth date, but he's long past, obviously. And I believe he died in 1970, if I'm not mistaken. But he was one of the first superstars of the game as it became professional. The difference between amateur and professional in respect to the Stanley Cup happened around 1908. When a league in actually Michigan, Upper Michigan, turned pro, started paying guys, and then everybody followed suit very quickly. And the league that was the forefront, the forerunner of the NHL was the NHA, the National Hockey Association. It existed from 1909 to 1917, and that's where we first got to meet Newsy Lalonde, those that were around back in those days. And as I was sharing this story the other day on the anniversary of his birth, and it was actually Phil Goyette's birthday the same day, and Phil Goyette was in Tremblant that night. He won 4 straight Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens in from 57, 58, 59, and 60. And Newsy Lalonde, that era, the best way to describe it, Greg, is that every decade or generation you go back, hockey was that much more violent. In 1950, a man named Sprague Cleghorn at the NHL awards dinner was being interviewed by a writer from Sports Illustrated who was trying to get his feet wet on the violence in hockey, which was still very, very significant, but not what it would have been in the 30s or 20s or 1910s. In Newsy Lalonde's heyday. And they asked Sprague, how many fights do you think you were in your career? This is all documented. People can go online and find this conversation. And Sprague tilted his head back and put his thumb and forefinger on his chin. And he says, do you mean just stretcher cases? Now, he was dead serious, absolutely dead serious. Sprague Cleghorn was fined and suspended by his own team. For violence. That's how violent he was. This is before Eddie Shore. And Eddie Shore was a whole other animal. But before Eddie, there was Billy Kachu, who was suspended for life. There was Sprague Cleghorn. There was Harry Mummery. And there was Newsy Lalonde. And these guys were vicious. They came from hard scrabble backgrounds who were very gifted athletically. So when you put them in the small confines of an arena and said, go out and beat those other 5 men, score more goals in any fashion possible, they took that literally. And they went out and would do anything necessary to win. And so much so, the games were so violent, so much blood, so many broken bones. It was not uncommon in the 1910s and into the 1920s for police to be waiting at the conclusion of a game to arrest a player or two. And the way the process worked was they would go in, talk to the coach. Who's the guy? Everybody knew. Let's say it was Newsy. Newsy's got to come down to the station. George Kennedy, owner of the Montreal Canadiens, or Leo Danderan. Newsy's got to come down to the station. Okay, I'll bring him down. And you'd shower up, bring him down to the station. Into jail he'd go, process, do the paperwork. It would take a couple of hours. Sometimes, depending on the egregiousness of the incident or the replication, how many times they may have to spend the full night. It has their penance, really, their punishment. Most times they were released in a few hours. They'd post a bond. It was almost always around $50. This is all documented as well in a brilliant 3-volume set, long since out of print, called The Trail of the Stanley Cup. If anybody ever gets a chance to get their hands on any of those editions, and I have them, the Charles Coleman was the author, and he broke it down from 1893, the first year the Stanley Cup was awarded, to 1967, the first year of the modern expansion when the 6 teams came in. And he broke that hockey into 3 different time periods. He has all these stories, multiple arrests at the conclusion of games, charges of assault that would have to be peace bonds, bail, what have you, posted for these players to go back and continue playing when they could. In some cases, suspensions were handed out. And we had the worst, of course, in 1908. Ironically, a game involving a Cornwall team. Newsy Lalonde was a young man at that time. He wasn't playing. He was only what would he have been? No, he was 21 years old. He was playing, but he wasn't in this game. And a man was killed. Owen McCourt was killed during a brawl on the ice. And the man who was later charged for the murder, his name was Charles Masson, Masson. He was later acquitted. How are you going to prove it, right? It was 15, like everybody on the ice was fighting, breaking sticks over each other's head, spearing each other in the throat, and punching the shit out of each other, till guys were incapacitated. That's what it was like in those early days of hockey. And it's really, really hard to explain unless people have done some research. But when it was Newsy Lalonde's birthday, and I was recanting some stories about him, because he was one of the most gifted players. His name dots the record books for points and assists, and he was right there with the Cy Dennitys and the Nell Stewarts. Not quite Joe Malone. You had Joe Malone, then you had Newsy Lalonde and Nell Stewart and a bunch of others that came along very, very quickly, including Howie Morenz, who came in 1924. So he would have been privy. He would have seen and been part of some of this. He was no shrieking violet himself, by the way. But that's the way it was then. When guys like Newsy Lalonde and those guys played, it was vicious. Eddie Shore, just one more digression, Greg. Eddie Shore holds the record, and it's not a record that was ever kept. But now, if you fight 3 times in a game, you're kicked out. You can actually fight twice in an NHL game right now, currently, 2025, and stay in the game. If you have a third fight, regardless who started it, whatever, they'll toss you. Back in the day, you could fight as many times as you wanted. And in 1929, this is an amazing story. In a game between the Montreal Maroons and the Boston Bruins, the Montreal Maroons set out to say that tonight, Eddie Shore goes to the hospital. We don't care how. We don't care about the game. We don't care about the score. Tonight, Eddie Shore goes to the hospital. And there was so much fighting in this game and so much blood that to stop the game, this is in 1929. The NHL is now already 12 years old. They had to scrape the blood off the ice, and they succeeded. They sent Eddie Shore to the hospital. He took 2 out of the 5 guys that he'd altercations with him. One of the guys, his last name was Trottier, no relation to Brian. Shore collapsed that man's lung. He collapsed his lung with a spear, followed by hitting, punching. It was the most vicious night in hockey history, a game between the Boston Bruins and the Montreal Maroons. Shore missed one game. When he next played on home ice, the owner of the Bruins, Mr. Adams, presented at center ice prior to the game, gave Eddie Shore a check, $100 for every stitch that he took in his face. Gave him a check for multiple hundreds of dollars in 1929. This whole incident should be documented unto itself. The Maroons set out to put Eddie in the hospital. They succeeded. He took 2 guys with him. And it's the most violent night in hockey history. People have no idea. If the fans today who get upset when something happens in the game or there's a little bit of scrapping, like last night with in the Boston Islander game, right? When Zadorov ran Schaefer and all the Islanders came. That was warm up back in the day. I mean, that was nothing. And Zadorov's a throwback. you could parachute that guy back in and he'd be fine. So would some guys, so would some other guys today. But 90% of the league today wouldn't know what to do. They'd put their thumb up their butt. The fans would too. They'd put their other one in their mouth and they'd cry like babies at the way it was back then. And despite that, you had all of these phenomenal players who could play the game so expertly and so well. Eddie Shore was a 4-time Hart Trophy winner. Howie Morenz led the league in scoring, was a Hart Trophy winner, Stanley Cup winner. They both won cups. Like they were the two. They were the Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews of that era, albeit one as a forward, one as a defenseman. It was just a different time, Greg. And I know I've researched it all. I've interviewed a lot of guys who played in that era, a lot of guys over the years since I started doing all this. And I could talk about it all day because I'm mesmerized by it. I would love to have been able to go back in time and be in the rink in one of those games, man, and see it all go down. It would have been not because just because of the violence, but just to see. Look, you're talking about your relative who saw Howie Morenz play. I've talked to people. I talked to his line mate, for God's sake. Rose Joliet and I used to drink quarts together at the Prescott Hotel. And I would ask him about Howie Morenz. He was Howie Morenz's line mate. And it was the start of everything, Greg, no matter what it is in life. Our own lives, sporting events, historical events, there has to be an origin. There has to be a spark. There has to be a start. There has to be a genesis. And for hockey, and specifically for the NHL, we have that chronologically. We know it started in 1917. But where did it come from? The NHL just didn't parachute out of nothing. Okay, had the NHA. Right. Well, where did the NHA come from? Where did the Stanley Cup come from? So all of that had a beginning. And out of that beginning begot this, what became a very, very, very violent game, because it was played by hard-scrabbled men who came from poor existences, who were great athletes. Any era, every era has great athletes. And you put blades on their feet and gave them weapons and said, go out and score more goals than those 5 guys. Yes, sir. No problem. I'll leave my wake, but I'm going to do it. And that's who you had playing hockey at that time.